I'd like to introduce with great pleasure not a new speaker to this forum. Mohamed Yusuf is known by the group. He's a senior principal at EY. He's going to focus on, two aspects: navigating challenges, embracing innovation. So those words go together, right? Challenges and innovation. He's gonna, with his magic, show us how embracing innovation will help us solve complex challenges. He has a great experience with EY, leading their technology strategy, function, and transformation. He has been with Deloitte prior to EY doing the same, and he has been leading, particularly with the Saudi government, lots of complex digital transformation initiatives. He's going to take us through the concept, how significant it is in the business landscape, and how do we face these challenges while implementing it, and not to mention the focus on successful case study. Please welcome me to introduce and have the session going on with Mohamed. Fadal on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let me check if you can hear me. Sounds like you can. Thank you. Thanks very much for the invite. Much appreciated. Thank you, Dr. Darren. I'm quite intrigued by the Arabic podcast. I'm quite keen to look into that. This is the control, is it? Yeah. So I'll be brief in the introduction. You've heard that already. But what I'll do today is share a few of insights, experience. Clearly, we have a number of esteemed colleagues here. The concepts that I'm going to introduce and some of the points that I'm going to articulate will not be new. They will not be something that you haven't heard before. Frankly, even the challenges, you've probably seen, experienced a number of those. But I'll give you my perspective. I'll give you the view that I've had and what we encounter on a regular basis. If I move on to, I guess I'll touch a couple of things on the introduction, which is that I've been in the region since 2009. And I've lived in Qatar, I've lived in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and now Riyadh. So whilst the background is in the UK, I am quite familiar with the Middle East. And what we do in the team that I run is just the transformation. So it's strategy, operating model, enterprise architecture, a lot of the good stuff that a lot of you are very familiar with. And the primary clients that we have is public sector, energy, financial services, but I've got a lot of background in telco, in TMT industry. So before we get into the concepts and the challenges and case studies, I'd like to do something, a little exercise with you, and I'd like you to think and fast forward 15, 20 years from today, okay? I want you to picture an organization and really visualize this particular company. It could be your own organizations. It could be the companies that you currently work for. It could be a private entity that you admire. But I want you to genuinely think of that. And I want you to now think through of specifically a number of services that they have within this organization that you have in mind. Call it Company X. And these services are talking to one another. They don't require you to have a governance call or, they are automated truly, and they interact with one another. I then want you to think that there is, of course, key data within this Company X. And that data and these services are seamlessly in tune with one another. And there are decisions that are being made by these services that are fully automated, and those decisions are driven by real science and real data points from this clean system that is there. It just works. You have a team, a workforce that is fully energetic, enthusiastic, and are embracing these changes and these automated services that are fully functioning. And this is key. You have, and again, picture very specific individuals. Give them names if you need to. But this is a workforce that is fully enthusiastic. And then finally, you have the technology that is driving the business. Now, if some of you have worked in, and I'm sure that is the case, that have worked in IT operations or technology teams delivering projects, you are not reactive. You are not answering to the business as to why the projects are late. You are not talking about incidents and problems and issues, because those, they don't happen. This is it's a very different business. You've moved forward 20 years from today. That is a picture that I want you to have. So, the definition of digital transformation for me is in that picture of Company X, or whatever you called it, and the move from where the real position of where we're at today, to a utopia. That, for me, that step change is transformation. And if you break down some of the specifics, you look at the technology, you look at the people, the enthusiastic team, and you look at those services or processes that were fully automated, the clean data that I referred to, all of those elements, getting those elements to the right maturity is critical for that to actually materialize and for you to get closer to utopia. So, why does this matter? Of course, there are a number of reasons, and I'll list a few of those here. Operational efficiency, elevating the citizen experience. When you're ahead of operation, you don't have incidents, you don't have challenges. You know, of course, what I'm picturing here and what I'm asking you to visualize is utopia, but I think you get the picture. Data-driven. You know, I made a point earlier on Company X that its decisions are made with real science and real outputs. It's not emotions, it's not driven by the culture of the organization, it's not driven by, you know, we want this particular project because it's supported by the governor, by the CEO or whoever, but it's genuinely because of very specific points and insights driven from your data. And agility and innovation. That is critical and that's important. So, I won't spend a lot of time on the key drivers, but there is an expectation from customers and citizens. Now, if you look internally and you look at how people use services today, and you think back, you know, you can see the gray hair. I've come from a position where we had, before we had mobile phones, and when we did, I looked after black and white portals on a mobile phone back in the UK. And so today, and the experience today, that customers would have, the expectations that customers would have, applications, take any service and any level of interaction. You're watching, you know, something at home. The bandwidth, you have a personal expectation of bandwidth that you simply expect to be there. You know, this is very different to history. So this is driven by the expectation of our customers and citizens. Technological advancements, that is very, very different today. And then, of course, there are certain aspects around regulation and policy where you need to comply. There are very specific points that there are no questions or options around for good reasons. And then you, of course, to run a profitable business, you always will have the cost implication and the need to always optimize from a finance and a cost perspective. So there are a number, and the list can go on. I've picked a few of what we typically come across. So, of course, it's not straightforward, because otherwise we wouldn't have sessions such as these and great minds in the room such as yourselves thinking through as to how, and exchanging ideas of how best we overcome some of these challenges. There are genuine challenges. There are failure rates in these things. I won't pretend that everything that we've ever done historically has gone perfect. And some of the challenges are resistance to change. And frankly, some of the case studies I'll pick on will demonstrate this in a moment, but resistance to change. So technology, I'm passionate about technology. I've been in tech all my life. The people aspect is frankly, in most cases, what is more challenging. Where you have the culture of an organization, you have people, you have certain practices that have been there from day one. That, for me, is the area that we must get right, and frankly can be a lot more complex than trying to implement integration between 4, 5, 6, X number of systems. You do also have challenges with technology, particularly where you have outdated systems, systems where support or integration becomes very difficult because it is simply old. There are particular complexities that come with certain types of information that you have because of data privacy and some of the security compliance that you must have. And then you have skills gap, and this is one that I'm currently facing within my own department. The number one, and I'll repeat this, the number one skill that we need are enterprise architects and solution architects. Absolutely, by far, compared to anything else. And that's been the case for at least the last, as long as I've been in this particular organization. So it is. This is one example. You have in other areas of our business, of course, AI is critical. So skills gap is also a very important point that I'm sure that you've faced and seen as challenge. Siloed functions. Now, for me, this is related to people, organization, how you're structured, and so forth. But that really does cause a chunk of our time in terms of governance, in terms of winning people over, in terms of bringing departments together and to collaborate. Yeah? I think there was an example of GoSee, which I found quite insightful earlier, in terms of how digital transformation is done. Clearly, there are advancements that have been made. In Aramco, the same thing, but for us, this is something that we see quite often. And then the final example that I'm going to list is a management problem, frankly. Where you don't have the level of clarity that you need at the strategic vision of an organization, you will invariably run into challenges as a direct consequence. So a couple of examples that I want to give. And the first is, again, technically not a challenge, but it was pure and simple paperwork. The amount, in this particular client, it was a government client that we had, the amount of paperwork, and I mean literally reams and reams of paper that was central to certain processes was huge. And what we did was, again, very simple, cloud-based, digitization, change of process, technically not very complex. But from a people perspective, and from change of process, change management, it was a project. It was we needed to overcome some of those challenges. But in its basic form, technically, wasn't that complicated. And just to be clear, we do have technical challenges as well in a lot of projects that we do. But the couple of examples I'm picking are more centered around human and people aspect. And the second was, again, a need to transform digitally and to move forward. But the crux of this second example, which is port operations, was really trying to get real-time data presented. And it was, there were some management pressures around the need to transform. There was, of course, if anybody's following port operations today and you look at what advancements there are in China, it is very different to the rest of the world. But this particular crux of the challenge was having the real-time data visible to multiple stakeholders. And as a result, again, there was implementation of IoT, and there was a degree of automation that we did, and also presenting information in real time. Again, technically challenging, moderate challenges, more from an integration and an IoT perspective. But again, it was a people needing to make sure that we have the right stakeholders, the appropriate level of mandates, the appropriate level of people simply wanting and being, again, think back to your company X, the enthusiastic workforce, people that you didn't need to put pressure on and that you didn't need to encourage along the way. You don't always get that. And as a result, you need to overcome those challenges. And again, that is what we've seen in this second example that I'm sharing. So if I move on, for me, the architecture, and I mentioned and said earlier that I'll come back to this, the demand that we have today on having solutions that require enterprise architects that can build multiple layers of architecture, or solution architects that bring domain expertise in being able to pull together appropriate systems. Some of the reasons why is because of the evolution that we see that is critical to any transformation in the space of architecture. And I'll bring up all of the different areas that we have here. So I'll take a couple of examples. Cloud. Clearly, that is a massive area. We've seen presentations in Leap. We've seen commitments by a lot of the product firms in terms of coming to the Middle East. We've seen genuine changes that have already happened in that space in both Saudi and the UAE and so forth. That is absolutely a huge piece. AI, we've heard a lot about AI, generative AI, machine learning. That is clearly something that is transformational. And again, skill set from an architect perspective are people that understand infrastructure, that can look at hybrid cloud and give you the detail of a private cloud and what data that can be, that can reside outside the country versus inside, the appropriate governing bodies. That is clear, and that is a demand that we have today. And then I'll pick an example of security. Security, I think it could have been the previous presenter, Dr. Darren, who mentioned security by design. That is absolutely the case. So whilst we have a vertical within our business that focuses on security, I need a cybersecurity architect in almost every project that we deliver. And the question is how much time that they spend, whether they're just a subject matter expert and they have a few hours, but almost in everything that we do, we absolutely have to get it right from day one in terms of getting the appropriate cybersecurity standards in place. Because a lot of what we do is strategy for clients and helping through a transformation. So these are some of the evolving areas within architecture that we see today. Now, I'm sure none of these would come as a surprise. So now, I couldn't put together a presentation without also mentioning AI, and again, very visible in the news. I mean, the amount of videos that I have on YouTube that are presented to me in terms of generative AI, the new features this week, the newsletters that I get on a regular basis, this is a space that is very, very visible. Admittedly, mostly from some of the models such as ChatGPT. But this is becoming a core enabler for transformation. Either from the angle of this is capability that we didn't have and we do today, and we can genuinely automate, and we can do something very radical, or from the perspective of we have a senior individual in our business who is keen on this, and therefore we need to invest some money. We're not quite sure what we're going to do with it, but Gen AI surely can make a transformation, therefore we've got a bit of budget and we need to spend that. Or we have a pilot that we would like to test, and we've got some ideas about use cases and so, but it is an enabler in multiple different forms, but this is absolutely something that is not going away and is driving force. Multiple reasons. Automation, prediction, predictive analytics is something that we've been doing for a very long time. It's not new. It's not new at all. From day one, is going back as far as when I went to university, which was a while back. The capability that we have is different. The technology that we're using is different. And the results and the accuracy, if you get it right, is very, very powerful. And several others. There are also some concerns with this capability. There are also areas where we need to be very careful about how you implement ethical aspects of it. So it's an enabler, lots of potential benefits, but we need to be a little bit careful in its implementation. And that's all I wanted to cover in terms of artificial intelligence, but we could spend the rest of the day, frankly, just on some of this. So specifically, insights around in the region and what we've seen and what we've come across around in the GCC and in the MENA region, which is where I operate. Clearly, digital strategies, very bold, very clear, comprehensive. Digital ID services, they're done very differently in this region. I've spent most of my life in the UK, and I've worked in Europe as well, the mainland Europe, and we do government ID very differently. And living in the Middle East, its uses and application is clearly very different. Regulatory bodies, there is huge momentum and drive from we've heard of DGA today, we've a fantastic presentation. Focus areas, so smart cities, the development of smart cities, again, very unique in this part of the world. Some of the size of these projects, very, very different to the rest of the world. And when you see the output and what's developed, and you walk through, whether it's, I'll pick CAFT as an example here, it's something to be proud of. I travel a lot. I was in the US last year, and I go back to the UK quite often and across Europe. But when you see some of the developments in smart cities in the region, you need to reflect. And you need to, there are innovations, there's, automated cars and so forth around the rest of the world. But when you look at some of these things, it really does, you should stop and reflect. So how things are done in this area is, and the focus areas that we have in the region is very different. I've talked a little about cybersecurity and AI already. And finally, some of the topic of innovation. It is absolutely in multiple meetings, multiple projects, the topic of innovation is not just a nice to have. It's not just let's have a little quiet corner for 2-3 enthusiastic folks in our business to try and come up with new ideas. But there is a genuine drive to create a culture, create a space where people can think, innovate, and come up with new ideas and contribute. And that's fantastic. It's not often that you see that, and certainly in my overall experience, it's not something that I've always seen. And then there's some very specific points and certain drivers within the space of innovation, which I won't read in detail, but the slides will indeed be shared. So I started by saying I'll share a few thoughts, but I'll conclude and say, if you think back to Company X, or whatever you called it, and you look at specifically people, or I called it services on that first slide, and you look at the process, which I called services. If you look at people, which were the enthusiastic folks in that organization and who you didn't need to pressure or put any degree of encouragement to, they were fully aligned with the transformation. And technology. And I talked a little bit about the fact that there was a clean data that the technology was operating at. People, process, technology, it is key. Architecture and AI, I've talked about that, and I've listed the evolution and where the direction where architecture was heading and some of the very specific regional drivers that were there. And finally, bold regional visions. And Vision 2030 is just one example, but some of the large government-sponsored initiatives that you have here in this region is impressive, and it's something to take account of. That is all. Thank you for your time and patience.